Thank you, sir. Good evening and welcome to the October 10th, 2019 Board of Education Work Session. Before we begin, I would like to, as always, ask everyone to turn off your wireless communication devices as they may interfere with the microphones and taping of our meeting. I would ask my colleague, Mr. Valentine, to please lead us in the board prayer and the Pledge of Allegiance.
Let us pray. O God, we pray to administer that which is just in all educational policies, being ever mindful of your guidance, steer us to action with love, wisdom, and understanding. Amen. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Ms. Berkeley, and thank you, Ms. King and Ms. Berkeley, for preparing us for the meeting. As always, we thank you very much. Ms. Berkeley, would you please call the roll?
Good evening, board members.
Good evening.
Ms. Ahmed.
Here.
Ms. Boozer-Strother.
Here.
Mr. Burrows. Mr. Montero. Mr. Murray. Mr. Omolola. Mrs. Queen. Mrs. Shepard.
Here.
Mr. Thomas. Mr. Valentine. Mr. Wallace.
Present.
Mrs. Williams. Dr. Thornton.
Present. Thank you very much. Colleague, I will now ask for a motion regarding the agenda for the work session. It's been properly moved and seconded that the agenda for October 10th of the board's work session be approved. Hearing no questions regarding it, those in favor, please say aye. Those opposing, no. The ayes have it. I'll ask you now to draw your attention to the board minutes of September 19th, and a motion is in order. It's been properly moved and seconded that the minutes of September 19th of the Board of Education be approved. Hearing no modifications, those in favor, please say aye. Those opposing, no. The ayes have it. We'll now move, colleagues, to the public comment section of our agenda. We have signed up 3 individuals to speak before the board this evening. And I'll first call Ms. Teresa Dudley. I don't see Ms. Dudley here. Then I'll move to the next speaker, and that's Ms. Nancy Patton. Ms. Patton, please come forward. Progressive Equine Therapeutic Services. Ms. Patton, hello. What do you have for us? I used to ride one of those as a child. Welcome, Ms. Patton. Please proceed.
Thank you. Yes. I say good evening to all of you, both of us, and my colleague, Leah Miller, back there. And I want to thank you for this opportunity to share about PETS, P-E-T-S, which is Progressive Equestrian Therapeutic Services Incorporated. And PETS is the gem of Prince George's County. The board members were sent an email a couple days ago regarding this program and an invitation to an upcoming golf tournament that we're having locally in Prince George's County. So you may be familiar with some of the words that I'm going to speak because I only have 3 minutes. Okay, in these trying times, it's my pleasure to personally share with you some uplifting events that are happening within our county, as well as to extend an invitation to all of you here that are present tonight. Over 35 years ago, the nonprofit PETS, P-E-T-S, standing for Progressive Equestrian Therapeutic Services, Inc., has been providing therapeutic horseman opportunities for children and other residents with disabilities within Prince George's County. This service is a totally free service to the riders and their families. The riding sessions are staffed entirely by volunteers who love to work with horses and who appreciate seeing the therapeutic benefits of the riders. All members of the PETS, including its own board members, are volunteers. Several are current and retired, educators, and therapists within our county school system. Many Prince George's County youth earn community services while volunteering in our program. Beyond the regular horse care and assistance to riders, other volunteer services include ongoing need to locate additional qualifying horses, recruiting riders, and recruiting volunteers, as well as the opportunity to exercise our horses during the winter. The spring and summer riding sessions are held at the Showplace Arena right here in Upper Marlboro. Our wonderful loyal horses are presently in winter board at a Maryland horse facility in our county. As you can see, Pets is a gem within Prince George's County that is providing therapeutic benefits to our riders in many aspects of their health and wellness, supporting their social, emotional, physical, sensory, and cognitive development. Because Pets is totally nonprofit, a 501c3 organization, the volunteers are also involved in fundraising in order to provide the winter care for the horses, as well as their supplies and tack. During the summer, the Maryland Park and Planning supports us at the Showplace Arena. We are inviting you to participate. There will be flyers available that you can fill out and sign, and we'll be here to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you so much for presenting before us and the service that you provide. The next speaker is Marnie McMillan from Impact College Access Program. Ms. McMillan.
Good evening.
Good evening.
As a PGCPS graduate, former employee, and Prince George's County native, I stand before you today to talk about an organization I developed after witnessing the needs of youth in our community from the outside looking in and the inside looking out. Based in Prince George's County, Maryland, Impact DMV is a 501c3 organization that helps youth and young adults accomplish their creative, academic, and career goals. In 2018, we challenged ourselves to develop a college prep workshop that would walk 150 freshmen through rising seniors and their parents through the college application process. The games, presentations, panels, and assistance from recent college graduates were a huge success. Still, we realized we needed to do more. Following the workshop, we created Impact Your Acceptance, a no-cost, ongoing workshop that would help 15 selected seniors and their families conquer the college application process. From requesting recommendation letters, editing over 60 essays, completing FAFSA, and more. Impact Your Acceptance tackled every inch of a very important, intimidating process. It's an honor to inform you that the 15 students who completed our program and graduated in spring 2019 received over 100 acceptance letters and over $2.1 million in scholarships. In an effort to replicate these outcomes, we reached out to every counselor at each high school in Prince George's County with hopes of encouraging students from every high school to apply. Our efforts resulted in over 140 applications, which far surpassed the previous year. Once we selected 15 class of 2020 seniors from various high schools in the county and partnered with the Shops of Iverson to give these students the weekly in-person experience they needed, we got to work. I'm proud to say after working with them for 13 consecutive weeks this summer, all 15 are still enrolled. We helped them craft over 115 essays, and they will be applying to over 200 schools on application day, which will be held on October 26th at City of Praise Family Ministries, who will be covering every application fee for each IYA student. Today, I want to ask that all board members get involved with Impact DMV and the IYA program. This can look like volunteering your time to meet with our scholars and share your own stories that will continue to ensure them that success in our community is possible. This could be sharing information about our organization in your district schools and communities so other community members can get involved and we can begin receiving applications from students enrolled at every high school in the county. Lastly, this is opening the door for us to visit these schools in person and truly make a lasting impact. I stand before you to not only spread awareness, but inform you that we need you in order to go a step further and ensure that IYA and other programs like it continue to outline positive pathways for the youth in our community. Thank you for your time, and as always, be impactful.
Thank you, Ms. McMillan, for your comments. We will now, colleagues, yield the floor to Dr. Golson for an introduction of items 4.1 through 4.6. Dr. Golson.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Items 4.1 through 4.6 requires board approval of proclamations commemorating Maryland Emancipation Day, Read for the Record Day, American Education Week, National Native American History Month, School Psychology Awareness Week, and National Hunger and Homelessness Awareness Week.
Colleagues, a motion is in order regarding items 4.1 through 4.6.
So moved.
It's been properly moved and seconded that the board adopts items 4.1 through 4.6. Hearing no questions or comments, those in favor, please say aye. Those opposing, no. The ayes have it. We will now move to discussion items, and we have the honor of Mr. John Willem from MABE to give us a briefing on the Kirwan Commission on Innovation and Excellence, an update. Please join us, Mr. Willem. And thank you for coming to Prince George's County, Maryland's most important county, to speak before its most important board. So thank you, sir. You'll take that back to MABE, right?
Absolutely.
Welcome, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Dr. Thornton, Dr. Goldson, members of the board. Greatly appreciate this opportunity. John Willems on behalf of the statewide Maryland Association of Boards of Education, and looking forward to rather expeditiously highlighting what brings us to the Kirwan Commission's nearly final recommendations and the need for passage of momentous legislation in the 2020 legislative session to launch a 10-year phase-in of a significant and transformational increase in education funding and policy reforms to benefit all Maryland students. In Maryland, it's a constitutional imperative to fully fund public education. This is very old language that is not stale. It has been reinterpreted by courts in the 90s and even more recently than that to be updated to reflect the adequacy and equity within our state school finance system. And so the constitutional mandate to fund a thorough and efficient system of public schools basically means what you would think it means. It means an education that is preparing students for college and career readiness and success on measurable standards. And so the state has agreed to uphold this standard. In some of our memories and experience, in 2002, through the work of the Thornton Commission and Bridge to Excellence Act passing, and is poised now to reaffirm that constitutional duty by enacting the full panoply of recommendations of the Kirwan Commission. In terms of what brings us here, it's been a long journey and we are far from over. If you look to the late 90s when the Thornton Commission was beginning and the passage in 2002, we achieved an adequate amount of per pupil funding for almost all students in almost all jurisdictions by 2008. The economy crashed, we stalled and maintained a plateaued amount of funding going forward. 2008, folks, was a long time ago. Generational, really, in terms of our public school body, our students who come to us as infants and toddlers, and to some of us don't look much older than that when they're graduating, but as a father of a 21 and 23-year-old, even if they're not shaving every day, they are young men, and the public school system obviously owes them an education that prepares them for their futures. And so 2014, again, a while ago now, 6 years, we started costing out what it would mean to update our school finance system. That number was $2.9 billion. That gave people sticker shock. They brought in a group called NCEE to see if there weren't more efficient and means of updating our school finance system to make us more like Finland and Shanghai and Singapore and Switzerland in some creative ways. And we'll get to the big dollar amount in a minute, but it's $3.8 billion at the end of a 10-year phase-in, combined state and local increase in funding. Gives you some sense that you can have two studies, two approaches, come to very large numbers in terms of the inadequacy of what we're currently doing on behalf of our students. What happened in 2018? Some very significant things. Legislation passed to start folks seeing what it would look like to target funding to schools and students with the highest needs based on concentration of poverty. $200 million was set aside, but really question 1 passed. So if you thought that we legalized casino gaming to benefit the schools, you may or may not have been fully correct in that when we did it, but going forward, following the passage of question 1, you're absolutely right. That education trust fund, that 30% of the casino revenue that's dedicated to public education, is transitioning to be new money for us going forward at $125 million a year. And so passage of question 1 in the fall of 2018 was enormously important. And then the interim report, and it was really, I have it under 2018, it was January of 2019 on the publication date, and I have a copy here. I really encourage everyone to read this. Interim does not begin to convey how final the recommendations in this report are. This is really the Kirwan Commission's report in terms of all of its policy recommendations around the 5 pillars that I'll describe shortly. This slide really depicts the growth of that transition of the casino revenue, and at $125 million a year, that $500 million figure, it will be even more than that. It's estimated to be slightly more than $500 million now, but that is the portion of the casino revenue that's dedicated to the education trust fund. So as casino revenues increase, which they have every year, that number will grow as well. In 2019, earlier this calendar year, what happened? Well, a piece of legislation passed called the Blueprint for Maryland's Future, and a plus and a minus to that. The plus is that it's an enormously momentous bill that for many states, not Maryland, might be the whole story. A 3-year funding initiative of $1.1 billion is a big deal. But that's not what Kirwan is all about. That's not the full set of funding recommendations. That's not the full set of policy recommendations. So only in Maryland could you call a 3-year, $1.1 billion funding initiative Little Kirwan. But that's what I like to think of it as, because Big Kirwan is coming. The bill lays the framework out for what you'll see in the future. Expanded full-day kindergarten, teacher salary grants, concentration of poverty grants, but there aren't major policy reforms attached to this increase in funding. But here you can see that a not insignificant amount of additional funding is provided right now for the 2019-2020 school year in these categories. Again, enormously significant. This demonstrates to me, and I think it should to everyone, that the legislature has bought in to this notion that we need to increase in these areas, including the addition of the concentration of poverty grants. And so initially, focusing on schools with 80% and more free and reduced price meal eligible students, that's where some of the funding is targeted now for the positions of the community schools coordinator and the additional health professional to support the wraparound services at those schools. But the vision is to expand those services to schools with 55% poverty and above. Again, what did not happen in 2019, Big Kirwan, the major funding and reform bill, did not pass. And a reminder that this mission, this charge to Kirwan, is twofold. So you're talking about updating the funding formulas, which can certainly be a little dry and complicated, and we'll talk about the funding work group in a minute, but also the policy recommendations to really transform the school system. If we want our CTE system, our career technology education system, to be preparing students in 11th and 12th grade for careers and trades, if we want students to be guaranteed options to basically enter college as 11th and 12th graders for AA degrees while they're still pursuing their high school diploma, that's the kind of transformational change that we're talking about. And so it's really a call to action. And again, that's why I encourage everyone to take a look at this interim report. It is, at some level, flowery rhetoric, but you're talking about investing a couple $2 billion of additional local money and a couple $2 billion of additional state money to really do some big, bold things in these 5 areas. Early childhood education, high quality teachers and leaders, teachers and principals, career and college readiness, CCR, and career technology education, CTE, The more resources to ensure all students are successful. We'll talk in a minute, but that's about increasing the foundation amount for all students and increasing targeted money for high needs groups of students. And then governance and accountability as well. A perennial interest of the legislature as we implore them to give us the money needed to meet higher standards is the accountability for demonstrating that we are in fact moving toward meeting those standards with the additional investment. Early childhood education, the big thing here is expanding from all low-income 4-year-olds to all low-income 3-year-olds. And so an enormous expansion in the scope of service in pre-kindergarten. I know I've broken every rule in terms of how many words you're supposed to put on a PowerPoint slide, but there is a lot here. You have the information as well, but I want to point out that there's some work to be done here in terms of how to implement an expansion of pre-K. Some of it's going to be all state and local funded, but no cost to parents, and maybe that got your attention. Why would we be talking about charging parents? Because this is on a sliding scale, so at least the consultant's recommendation is to provide free access to universal access to pre-K for low-income 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds below 300% of poverty. But between 300 and 600%, there would be tuition charged on a sliding scale. That's tuition charged by students in private providers and students attending public school. And then above 600% of poverty, the cost would be borne by parents entirely. Again, whether those students were attending private facilities or public schools. That will be a major policy issue for the full Kirwan Commission to wrestle with in the coming months as they make their final recommendations. And then the last bullet on this slide, it's not just kind of even waiting until they're 3 years old and coming into high-quality pre-K programs. It's really looking at Judy centers and family support centers, and it's the birth to 3, the birth to 5, ensuring that students have access to high-quality wraparound services really from the get-go, which is what a lot of our competing nations do. Teachers and leaders, we're looking at transformative change in terms of the way teachers teach and are allowed to teach with a little more autonomy and time to prepare and collaborate, and also to not have to leave the classroom to become administrators if they want to get a significant pay increase. And again, that would be a transformative change. Again, a lot of information on this slide. We're talking about raising standards to become a teacher. We're talking about then providing pay for performance up a career ladder that allows a teacher basically to start at $60,000 a year and make $120,000 a year without leaving the classroom, working up a career ladder toward becoming a master and then professor teacher. Certainly not something every teacher would do, but many teachers would have the opportunity to pursue that, and then there would be an administration track as well. The last bullet there, and I know if our state superintendent were here, Dr. Karen Salmon, a huge proponent of promoting the profession of teaching to young people, and so that they enter the field, and doing so in a way that attracts students from diverse backgrounds, so that our teacher corps begins to more closely resemble our student corps, which is a national and state priority, or certainly should be. College and career readiness. This is that transformative change for high schoolers in terms of preparing for college with an important element of CTE training as well. On college readiness, one of the things they want to do is not wait until kids don't pass the test at the end of 10th grade, but to provide earlier interventions and tutoring for students. And some of this is back mapping. Some of this is about talking to 6th and 7th and 8th graders about if you pass this test at the end of 10th grade, these English and algebra tests basically under our current rubric, then you'll have these amazing opportunities to start community college as 11th grader, to have teachers teaching you college level courses in your high school. And so to really hold out that opportunity, but also raise that expectation. And one of the visions of Kirwan is to impose a mandate on us, which it's usually my job to oppose folks imposing mandates on us. The mandate would be that at the end of a 10th grade, if a student meets that threshold of college and career readiness, they would be guaranteed these high-quality opportunities to an IB program or an AP diploma track, dual enrollment, and or a redesigned CTE pathway. This is not exposure to careers. This is actual licensure and certification. So it's not like what's a plumber do? It's you're gonna be a plumber in 2 years. You're gonna be on your way to having being certified and licensed in a trade if you continue on this pathway, and certainly a combination of these options. We're not looking at the English model as it used to be called, where if you fail a test, you're basically blue collar, and if you pass the test, we're white collar. We're never going to be adopting or proposing or considering that type of system, but providing options for students is something that the Kirwan Commission believes is very important. A little more on CTE, but I've pretty much described that already. More resources for high-need students. This is our bread and butter. This is our foundation amount that sets the basis of funding for all students, and then the targeted funding for students living in poverty, special education, free and reduced price meal, eligible and concentration of poverty, and limited English proficient. But there's more to this now. It's 2019, so we're talking about wraparound services, behavioral social services, et cetera. Again, a lot on this slide, but this is really the formulas that drive what the state investment is, and then from MABE's perspective, very important what the local share of funding is. What the state share is very important, but if our local governments aren't obligated to match that, then the state funding alone is not enough. Accountability and oversight. MABE firmly believes that our State Board of Education is basically the most powerful State Board of Education in the country relative to its regulatory and lawmaking authority and its oversight of local school systems. We don't need another state board, in MABE's view, and I don't think the state board believes we need another state board. And so in terms of oversight and accountability, when the Thornton Commission recommendations were essentially translated into law, we had a very robust master planning process, and school systems were held very much accountable on a budgetary basis for implementing those recommendations, and we believe that should be ramped up again. So on accountability and oversight, again, either the oversight board or a CTE committee, we don't want a process where these independent bodies essentially have veto authority over providing us additional money to what conforms with our plans. And so we want to be accountable for those dollars, but not limited in access to those dollars. This is an important slide to keep in mind for those of you who may have heard the phrase, money follows the child. There is a transformational recommendation embedded in the Kirwan Commission report that we be more accountable for that additional money we get for limited English proficient students, special education, and students living in poverty to demonstrate that we're providing additional services for those students in the schools that those students attend. And so moving away from that big fungible pot of money to a more school-based budget accountability model is something that is inherent in the Kirwan recommendations. On total costs, these are big dollars, but these are state and local dollars representing a 10-year phase-in. So don't be too shocked by that $3.8 billion. We can get there. We can certainly get there by achieving $814 million in increased investment in pre-K, $2.8 billion in teachers. And on teachers, I want to emphasize you're talking about staffing and salaries. Kirwan is about, yes, providing significant pay increases and doing the performance-based career ladder reforms, but it's also about hiring more highly qualified people, more counselors, more school psychologists, and more instructors, and so educators, paras, and classroom teachers. And so this reflects what other countries are doing in terms of emphasis on the classroom and less emphasis on administrative oversight and empowering teachers to be more collaborative. Yes, teaching less of the time and spending more time working with their fellow teachers on how to address individual student needs, and that's expensive. It's about $1.4 billion to hire more folks, and it's about $1.4 billion to give folks raises, and that's where that $2.8 billion comes from. And CCR-CTE, if anything, I think that $149 million number is low, but we'll get there. We can transform the high school experience for these students through our community colleges and other partnerships and make that happen. And the annual cost for the foundation and weights, again, $2.2 billion. That's the per pupil funding that will really drive what we're able to do for students. The next steps, we need to wrap up the Kirwan Commission work. The funding commission, a work group met earlier this week, and their recommendations will be wrapped up on October 15th and be forwarded to the Kirwan Commission. The Kirwan Commission was slated to meet 2 days later on the 17th. Maybe not too surprisingly, they announced today that they would not be meeting until October 30th. That gives staff some time to catch their breath and compile whatever the funding work group does by the 15th, and then we'll move forward from October 30th through the end of the calendar year to develop the Kirwan Commission recommendations. These are some of the things the funding work group is looking at. And again, looking at enrollment. Why would they be talking about enrollment? Do you want to just look at a September 30th count, or do you want to smooth that out over a 3-year average to account for declining enrollment so that it's not too steep a cliff for systems that experience declining enrollment? And many of the other factors there are pretty self-evident. But in terms of the local share calculation and the local wealth formula, there aren't major changes in the way we essentially require counties to provide a local share based on what the state share of the foundation is. There is an effort to make sure that there's no diminution in that local investment, and that'll be an important matter going forward. And the 10-year phase-in. There was an initial recommendation that in the first couple years of the Kirwan Commission phase-in, that it would be front-loaded with significant increased funding. If we had unlimited funds, that would be great, but I think realistically, we're looking at a more smoothed-out, even phase-in. The legislature told the Kirwan Commission they wanted to see that in language enacted earlier this year, and so that's very likely to be the recommendation going forward. Yes, a full Kirwan bill needs to pass. We need to do this in 2020. Again, even 2014 was a long time ago when we started to look at what this would cost, and 2014 was too far from 2008 when we achieved adequacy and started to slip. There is a coalition of 20 or so organizations that is the Coalition for the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. It is the Advocates for Children and Youth, Maryland State Education Association, the Baltimore Teachers Union. It is Strong Schools Maryland. Some of you may know them from their grassroots efforts to get Question 1 passed. And it is MABE and many other organizations, the state PTA, working together to get this across the finish line in 2020 at a grassroots level. There are community forums ongoing, and there's also a request for grassroots direct action to contact legislators. The community forums in Prince George's County, one happens to be tonight, the first one up in Laurel. There's another one on October 23rd in Bowie, November 12th in Largo, and November 18th in Oxon Hill. And so encourage everyone to get involved in those community forums and to pump up the volume and the movement toward passage of Kirwan in 2020. And then just a shout out from MABE to the folks who, from our perspective, have represented the state boards of education and local school systems so well. Joy Schaefer, Frederick County, our past president, on the Kirwan Commission, and then on the funding work group that will wrap up next week. We have Dr. Alvin Thornton himself and Cheryl Pasteur from the Baltimore County Board of Education representing local boards on those groups. And I want to thank you so much again for this opportunity.
Thank you so much, colleague. Thank you. Thank you. I see one board member wishing to ask a question. Mr. Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, John, and welcome to Prince George's again.
Thank you.
I was in the back. I was watching on the television. There was a comment around Little Kirwan, Big Kirwan, and folks may know in the room I've been very passionate about educational equity. So I feel like we're kind of baby Kirwan. We have discovered that our gaps in our achievement in Prince George's County center around the same 3 pillars that the state has spent many years studying: special education, students living in immense poverty, and students who are learning the English language for the first time. My comments, my questions really regard around the impact to local governments. If you could shed just a little bit more light on that, and what kind of mountain we need to climb in terms of advocacy on the local level, as one board at one LEA, or all 24 combined, going back into our home jurisdictions. And here in Prince George's, we have a law, an unfortunate law that kind of caps our revenue opportunities. And there has been some talk of going around that or removing that decades-long cap called TRIM to bring more revenue into our school system for the proper funding of our education for our babies. Do you know of any other LEA or any other board that has to overcome that type of hurdle, that type of property tax hurdle, or may have to dig a little bit deeper into their advocacy on the local level?
So a couple things. Yes, actually, Montgomery County, Anne Arundel County, Wycomico County, and Talbot County all have some form of revenue or budgetary cap. And recognizing that those jurisdictions, in addition to Prince George's County, had those caps in place, in 2012, when maintenance of effort reform legislation passed, there was a provision that authorized counties to essentially exceed their otherwise cap for the sole purpose of funding education. Again, giving some indication of the legislature's attention to this moving forward. Something else I would point out is that this is a state constitutional obligation, but counties in Maryland should recognize that they are, if not the only, almost the only counties in the country that have countywide piggyback income tax authority. That's conferred on them by the state. That's essentially a state taxing authority delegated to counties. And so counties need to recognize, and they do recognize, that they need to step up and increase their share of their amount of funding. They don't want to increase their share of funding, their amount of funding going forward, again, on a reasonably phased-in basis, and they're going to want, accountability for that too. We've seen some movement. We've had some recent elections in large jurisdictions in the state. We've seen some jurisdictions raise taxes for the first time in 20 or 30 years on income and/or property, and so and again, for our partners on the coalition, this polls really well. CTE and pre-K, and we hate to use acronyms, but preparing kids for college and careers and having kids entering school ready to learn, Marylanders get that. We have a very highly educated workforce in Maryland, and per our wealth, we are taxing that wealth at the lowest rate of any state in the country. And so we have capacity to do better. Jurisdictionally, all politics is local, recognize that there are challenges there. But if we can communicate the benefit to students, families, economic development, job creation, I think we can get there. One example would be we educate in Maryland about 50% or less of the teachers who work in Maryland schools. Massachusetts, with whom we're competing, about 96% of their current stock of K-12 teachers went to college in Massachusetts. That would be transformational for us if we could start educating more of our own teachers here in state, having them prepared to teach to our standards and prepare our students for these transformational changes. That could be a game changer as well.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I see one more board member, and then we'll proceed. Mr. Valentine, is that you?
Thank you. And it gets to my colleague point around getting this done. I don't think anybody in this room would argue about the benefit of these 5 pillars, and it's hard to argue on the merits, even those who oppose it for fiscal reasons, I guess. And so my question to you is, from what I've been hearing, there's been an effort at the state level in the executive branch to undermine this through a campaign. Where are we seeing the most significant opposition, and on what grounds? And my second question is there potential for piggyback legislation? So, for example, you just mentioned the importance of growing our own teacher workforce here in Maryland. There's policies that I've supported and others have supported that would allow for particularly high-need teachers in Maryland to potentially get tuition reimbursement if they come back and teach for a certain period of time, and whether someone would support this legislation at the same time saying, okay, let's also have specific legislation that actually codifies a lot of the things you're talking about with regard to the legislation. And so is there conversation around, additional legislation that would codify some of the things within this? And you, in your position, looking at the legislative strategy, where are we seeing the most significant opposition, and what potential response do we have to that?
Thank you for the question. Excellent question. I think in terms of the opposition, we've seen some rhetoric, and we're aware of some fundraising around creating some pushback and some drag on this momentum. But that's a bit of rumor and fundraising innuendo. What we know is that while the governor did not sign the Kirwan legislation that passed earlier this year, he, at his discretion, released $255 million to launch it. And he refers to the Lockbox Initiative, which is question one, as the Hogan Lockbox Initiative. So we should remind him of this and remind him that as the governor of the great state of Maryland, he's already on record as wanting to move us forward to the tune of that more than $500 million in casino revenue and the additional $255 million that he released this year. He wants to launch a school construction initiative, which has a base cost of $125 million. So we need to continue to remind him that he's on the right track when he's talking about investing more in public education, and to not get caught up in the national debate, which may have, anti-union or anti-school board, anti-this, them, or the other. That's not Maryland's way. We need to be all in this together. Go back to the governor's inaugural address where he and Jeb Bush talked about moving forward in a different direction. I think these are important things for Maryland going forward. Our legislature is, I think, not in question. Our House and Senate seem poised to enact this, but why set up a veto override dynamic when you don't have to? And I guess lastly on that, the other facet of this is this legislation is really just the funding formulas in the policy. The revenue to support those formulas is very likely to be a separate bill or bills around other tax and revenue issues on which MABE is not likely to get in the weeds on in terms of tax policy, but certainly supporting the state's efforts to meet its constitutional mandate and imperative.
Thank you, Mr. Williman. Thank you, colleagues, for your questions. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. And don't let it take you so long to come back to Prince George's.
Absolutely not.
Colleagues, we'll now, as you know, we have three very dynamic committees that are serving the community in the Board of Education. Our Budget and Fiscal Affairs and Operations Committee chaired by Mr. Wallace, and our Academic Affairs Committee chaired by Mr. Montero and vice chaired by Ms. Sonia Williams. In the absence of Mr. Montero, we're going to ask Ms. Williams to please present a report, an update on the Academic Affairs Committee. Ms. Williams.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you, Dr. Thornton, for this opportunity to provide an update on the activities of the Academic Achievement Committee. So quickly following the MCAP presentation from the last board meeting. And also I want to thank you for being flexible for allowing the Academic Achievement Committee to present tonight, because our normal presentation would be next month in accordance with our policy that we approved last year. The Academic Achievement Committee is charged with overseeing the development and implementation of the school system's academic programs, operations involving student affairs, and initiatives designed to ensure effective and timely parent and community engagement with the school system. The committee's portfolio shall also include issues involving closing gaps in students' academic performance, extracurricular activities, improving outcomes in low-performing schools, and among underserved populations. We will also enhance outcomes for high-performing schools and students and address issues involving academic equity. Our committee, led by the esteemed Mr. Paul Montero, who due to work obligations could not attend tonight, otherwise he would be here presenting this update. We were able to meet on September 24th, less than a week after the MCAP score presentation. Present for the meeting, in addition to our chair, were all the committee members, which include Mr. Joshua Amalola, our student board member, Ms. Sandra Shepard, and me, Sonia Williams, serving as the vice chair. Supporting the committee and present at the meeting from the PGCPS staff was Dr. Kyra Libby, Chief of Academics, our board admin assistant, Ms. Amber Tate, and the board's executive director, Ms. King. Execution of the committee's charge, and at this meeting, more specifically, the charge of overseeing the development and implementation of the school system's academic programs, we started our meeting with diving deeper into the MCAP scores with a particular focus on math and numeracy. An engaging and interactive presentation was given by the curriculum and instruction staff, Ms. Dyson and Ms. Gates. The information presented included examples of the math units that teachers use to develop classroom instruction, how these units relate to the MCAP test. Questions that were asked included how this directly connects to the scores, and we also discussed how quickly teachers can assess and obtain feedback on student performance to actively provide support. We were provided with a list of the supports that are available inside and outside of the classroom, which was very, very informative and numerous. At the end of the presentation, in light of the PARCC scores and MCAP scores, math scores trending the same for the last few years, the committee decided to make math a topic that we will monitor throughout the year. We plan to have regular updates presented to the committee. Everyone tonight was presented with a t-shirt because we're taking math serious in our school system, and what it states is, all of us are math people, and you all know I love math. But on the back, it tells us what to do. Step 1, do math, any type. Step 2, be a person, because we're all math people. The MCAP presentation was followed by an introduction from the PGCPS Director of Community Schools, Dr. Talley. The presentation began with a history of the community schools in PGCPS, described the purpose, focus, and activities to occur in the coming months to stand up the community schools office. 3 activities that are going to be occurring in the 45 identified community schools, and 4, the expected outcomes of the community schools. Finally, the Academic Achievement Committee ended the meeting looking to develop our work plan from input from the committee members and to align that input and our focus with the school system expected outcomes laid out in this year's plan. Our next meeting is scheduled for October 17th, where we will have open and honest discussions regarding academics, curriculum, instruction, resources, and support for the entire school system, specifically our students, but also our parents, teachers, and administrators. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Williams, for standing in for Mr. Montero. Before I recognize Ms. Ahmed for this first question, I want to say also that we have the third committee that I did not acknowledge, and that is the committee that she chairs, which is the Policy and Governance Committee. So thank you, Ms. Ahmed. It was vice chaired by Ms. Boozer-Struthers. Ms. Ahmed.
Yes, I just wanted to speak briefly about the data dashboard. I'm really excited by that. It's something I had asked for something similar when I first got on the board, And we even voted to support an interactive platform as part of the budget committee in a previous year. But I'm so excited that you're doing it now. And I really appreciate, I know the presentation is not up there right now, but I really appreciate the fact that the information from my district school, BOE High School, was one of the demos there. And I appreciate it because I think many people think about the wealth of my district with communities like Woodmore and Oak Creek and misunderstand the students that we're serving at BOE. What that data dashboard showed me and showed all of us is that BOE High School serves 89% of students of color. Nearly 50% of those students are receiving special services like ELL, farms, or are students with disabilities. And over 50% are not meeting MCAT proficiency in ELA at least. And so I say that to you colleagues because whenever I utter anything about providing resources for my district, I want you to remember those numbers and know that there are thousands of students behind those. So that's one thing. I did want to say though, as we're moving forward with the data dashboard, is it possible to have demographics for buildings as well? Specifically like, the age of the school, capacity level, accessibility, where it stands in terms of different inspections. I know we're looking at demographics of students here and it's academic focused, but I think knowing that this is a huge issue or not issue, but a concern for many members of our community, the state of our buildings, that might be something to think about. And then the other thing beyond that is discipline. And I wanted to ask about discipline. I know that dashboard looks at in-school suspension and out-of-school suspension, but I want to ask, what are principals held accountable to when it comes to discipline? Because I want to say it's more than that. So Dr. Golton.
So thank you. Thank you for the recommendations for the dashboard. We weren't presenting tonight because there are some components that we're going to add to it. So thank you for those recommendations. We made a list here and add, so we can add. Our hope is that the well-rounded curriculum and graduation will be added to that platform so that, and our goal is to have it towards the end of October so that we can have the platform ready to roll in November. The question about what are principals held accountable for as it relates to discipline, what gets reported to Maryland State Department of Education is out-of-school suspension, and what you'll find on the dashboard is that it's real time. So I've asked that it be updated, I think, on a quarterly basis, so that the community can begin to look at it. I monitor it on a monthly basis and then provide feedback and have conversations with the Chief of School Leadership and Support so we can provide feedback and support to our principals as well.
Thank you. And I would just ask, maybe touching base with our student board member to see if there's any other additional things in terms of discipline or academics that he sees on that school level that we might want to include in that dashboard. Thank you.
Thank you, colleague. Ms. Queen, and then we'll proceed.
I just want to remind you all that one size does not fit all. So remember, no matter what we do, we got to be diverse in whatever we decide to do.
Thank you, Ms. Queen. Thank you. And again, thank you, Ms. Williams, for that presentation. Colleagues, we will now, I'm sorry, Mr. Burrows.
I just have, and Dr. Coley, I look forward to following up on our previous conversation. I met with a Booster Club president at a high school, and we don't have a PTSA, they have a Booster Club, who had some concerns about the school's data. And it is my hope that after this dashboard is fully up and running, that principals are able to articulate to their parents where they are and how they plan to get to the next step. It was, yeah, I'll just leave it at that at this time. But I mean, I think parents will have more confidence if they knew that their school leaders had a roadmap on how to boost student achievement in their buildings.
I appreciate that recommendation. Our principals did get an opportunity to see a prototype of our data dashboard during the Summer Leadership Institute on the very last day. So they will have an opportunity, just like we did for the Maryland State Department of Education before the star rating came out, to review their data, be able to answer it before we go public with it.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. And now, colleagues, we will move to item number 6 on our agenda, And Dr. Golson, I will now turn the floor to you to introduce it.
Thank you. The last item is for a career and technical education briefing.
Oh, that's right, I'm sorry.
That briefing is done because we have a career and technical education task force that is led by our chair of the Board of Education, Dr. Alvin Thornton. That task force is instrumental in developing, launching, and implementing the new CTE evening program that's offered now at Bladensburg High School. And they will continue to work to provide input in creating a program that we believe will become the best in the state of Maryland and will be an example across our country. And so this evening, Dr. Jean-Paul Cadet will provide a briefing of what that committee has done and an overview of CTE, a brief overview of CTE. Thank you.
Thank you, my colleague, okay, I have to say it right, my Morehouse colleague. Okay. Go ahead, Dr. Cadet, I'm sorry. All right. Go ahead.
Good evening, everyone. I will defer to my boss, Dr. Kyra Libby, Chief of Academics.
Before you do that, let me thank you all on behalf, because I've been sitting in these meetings recently, and on behalf of the board, I want to thank you all for the quality of your presentations at these task force meetings and the footprint that you provide for the Board of Education in the presence of our state leaders and county leaders who are now participating with us. So on behalf of the board, thanks to the both of you.
Thank you.
Please.
Good evening. I think we're waiting for the PowerPoint to come up. So this evening, we're going to give a brief overview of the programs, initiatives, and accomplishments for CTE. The vision for CTE basically is that all students are college and or career ready. That's the vision for all of our students across the board. Why CTE? It helps with our students to stay in school with many of our other academic programs. It helps to increase our graduation rates. And again, it makes our students not only college ready, but career ready. Those benefits are real world experiences. Students can graduate from Prince George's County Public Schools and walk straight into a job. One of the best examples is the Student Build House. For over 40 years, we've had the Student Build House where the students build it from ground up, including decorating and furnishing the home. And as Dr. Golson said, we thank the Board of Education for the CTE task force because that has brought CTE back to the limelight. And not only for the CTE Evening High School, but other initiatives that we want to do that make CTE not only the best in the state of Maryland, but nationally. Last year, we had our first ever career signing day, and this year, we're going to continue with that on May 7th for another career signing day. Because again, not only for college, but for the careers, we want to make sure our students are ready for one or the other or both. Dr. Cadet?
So students have the options to participate in any of our CTE programs in either one of our 2-, 3-, or 4-year programs. Each of our high schools throughout Prince George's County features at least one CTE program of study. Right now, we currently offer 10 programs of study, and within each of those programs of study, there are different pathways, which allows us to provide over approximately 46 pathways of options for our students within CTE. To further Dr. Libby's point, upon graduation and completion of a program of study, students receive industry-recognized certifications and licensures. These licensures range from Maryland State cosmetology licenses, Maryland Board of Nursing licensures, pharmacy technician, Firefighter 1, EMT, Adobe certification, ASE certifications, just to name a few. The payoff for completion is not only that they're able to earn these industry-recognized certifications and licensures, they're also able to move into salaried positions that in some cases they're able to do so, earn in excess of $40,000 a year right after coming out of Prince George's County Public Schools. Okay. So we wanted to share a couple of our highlights that we are very proud of in CTE. One is our P-Tech program at Frederick Douglass, and where we have over 150 students enrolled in either the Health Information Management or Hospitality Services Management program. The other is something that we're extremely proud of, which is our apprenticeship. For those of you who do not know, Prince George's County is the only registered apprenticeship provider, any school district in the state of Maryland that is a registered apprenticeship provider with the Maryland Department of Labor Licensure and Regulations. So over the summer, we initiated our first cohort of 20 apprentices, and those students they worked full-time with supervisors and master tradesmen in our building services department. And now that they are entering into their 12th grade year, they'll be able to earn approximately $15 per hour, and they will receive first-in-line consideration for employment with Prince George's County Public Schools upon their graduation. One of the other things that we are very proud of is the partnership that we have with Junior Achievement Finance. So we are launching our 3DE program at Potomac High School, and that is an amazing program that will definitely transform the culture and climate and academic progress of the students at Potomac High School. And the last highlight that we want to share right now is our Teacher Academy. We are now in partnership with Prince George's Community College, BOE State University, and the University of Maryland College Park to have our students who are in our teacher training program, our Teacher Academy of Maryland training program, to move through their studies at Prince George's Community College, and then whether they are going to be elementary ed or middle and high school ed, that will determine whether they will then have automatic enrollment into Bowie State University or the University of Maryland College Park. And then upon graduation, will again receive first-in-line consideration for employment as educators within Prince George's County Public Schools. As we look towards the future of CTE, as many of our districts have done, we are looking at the creation of a CTE hub school. We're looking to launch our South County site in the fall of 2020 with a proposed start of our Northern County site in fall of 2022. Some of the special features of that hub site will be an entrepreneurship track, financial planning, job coaching, customized college and career planning, personalized career exploration, and CTE-specific school foci. One of the most important things to note that as we move forward with the work of CTE, it's not just about creating a skilled workforce. We're also building our future entrepreneurs, business owners, and executive leadership that will move the work forward, not just in Prince George's County, but also nationally.
Thank you again for allowing us to have this quick briefing on CTE. We will go more in depth on CTE in our Academic Achievement Subcommittee meeting. And now we turn it back over to you, Dr. Thornton, for any questions.
Thank you very much. And again, Dr. Golson, thank you and your team for the footprint that you're creating in this space. Ms. Ahmed.
Dr. Cadet, thank you so much and Dr. Libby for all of your work here. Dr. Cadet, I also understand you're a professor? Yes?
Yes.
And you've brought a number of your students here today, so thank you so much for bringing all of your students. Could y'all wave real quick? All these students of Dr. Cadet over here, thank you. So I have a lot of questions and not a lot of time. Dr. Cadet, I wanted to ask, when it comes to the CTE hub schools with 40 programs each, 3 questions. Which building are you thinking of utilizing for this in the north? Would this eliminate the local programs already in schools? And what about our alternative schools? How do they fit into this? Sorry, that's a lot.
I do not have the answer for the first question.
I do. We don't have a location yet for the northern side.
Okay.
There you go. And I'm sorry, could you repeat the second question?
Would this eliminate the local programs that are already in schools?
No, it would not.
Okay, and then how do our alternative schools fit into this?
Alternative schools will still offer the CTE programs of study that they currently have. And we're also looking to expand a lot of those programs in schools based on student interest, workforce data, and TSA scores.
Okay, so I think that kind of leads into my next train of thought, which is about our current programming. What is your equity formula around placement of programs and the type of programs that you place? You want me to, I can give specific what I mean by that, if that would be helpful.
Yes, please.
Yeah, so when I'm talking about that, I'm talking about how do low graduation rates and low student achievement fit into the placement of a program? I'm talking about how does farms fit into that? I'm talking about how do you decide that this type of program needs to go into this school besides the fact that there's a community partner that's involved? And I'm talking about how do we know that we're serving all the students that want to enter into CTE?
So let me start to answer that. Let me first go back and clarify for the Southern Hub and the Northern Hub for CTE, the programs will be moved there. What will happen is that students, based on a geographic location, will either attend the Southern Hub or the Northern Hub, beginning at grade 9. Right now, our structure begins at grade 11, and what we find is that many times our students do not want to leave their current high school in order to participate in a CTE program that begins at grade 11. So this would allow students to have their core courses as well as their CTE focus at grade 9 through 12 at either Northern or Southern Hub. When we started with the creation of career and technical education programs, back when we started it, they were called career academies, and they were based on student interest, not in those schools, and not necessarily around free and reduced meals, the other subgroup categories that you identified. It really was around student interest, and then making sure that schools were at that time placed in 5 clusters, and that those clusters each represented CTE programs. That was how they initially started. Over time, what happened is as students began to understand what those career academies were, / now career technical academies, career technical education programs, some have gone away because of student interest, and others have been added in based on new legislation. An example would be PTAC or new programs.
Okay, and then I guess I'm wondering as well that in a previous presentation before this board, I think last year, maybe the year before, we talked about the underutilization of CTE programs. So where do we stand now? And how does this plan fit into closing that gap?
I don't recall if it was here last year, but I can tell you a great example would be the Fire Cadet program. So we started out with a low number at Gwen Park. We had a larger number at Charles Herbert Flowers High School, but the reason we had a larger number is because the students who attended that school were able to attend the Fire Cadet program, and the fire department is directly across the street. With the creation of the new Fire Cadet fire station across the street from Grim Park, we had a smaller subgroup that met, and what we did was then created a program where the students started at grade 9. And by doing that, we were able to increase the number of students who now participate. So that is how we now know that many of the times, and even with our 3DE program, we found out, our 3D program, we had too many acronyms around here. Our 3D program, students want to start at grade 9, and so we're changing our structure to do that.
Okay, and then I guess my last thing would be a follow-up item, and that's a request for, can we have like an equity analysis that looks at the types of programs and the placement, and then maybe based upon that, we can look at which populations may be underserved and how we can address those moving forward. I'm sure you all are already working on it, but it would be great for us to see too.
And we can provide you the report that provides enrollment over several years and how many students have passed the certification, technical skills assessments that are aligned with those certifications.
That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Ahmed. Ms. Queen.
Thank you, Dr. Thornton. I'm sorry, pushed it again. I have a couple of questions when it comes to CTE. My schools are in District 6, which is actually sort of like a lot of my schools are farms, low income, and one of the things I noticed is we don't have a lot of CTE classes within my area, and I'm trying to figure out why. I look at some of the things that you have, and one of the things that really bothered me is that Dr. Golson said a lot of the kids didn't apply for a lot of programs. But looking at the survey that was done not too long ago, recently, by a couple of board members and some of our elected officials, it was only surveyed to certain students and certain kids. I don't think we've done a survey across Prince George's County Public Schools to ask the students from middle school to high school what are their interests, because I know Central was not surveyed. And I think one of the biggest issues that I have is that, and I said it when I said one size don't fit all, I didn't really mean it as a joke. I'm serious about that. No matter what we do, whether it's math or whatever we do, it don't fit all. We have different students. We are all different up here on this board. And we have to realize that we have different kids within our school system. So we have to reach out to all of them. I really believe a lot more of our children will love to take these programs if we would open it up to them. But I want to know, how are we going about there, advertising it, getting it out there to them, and opening it up to every child, no matter who wants to take barbering, no matter what is cosmetology, but not turning anyone down, that every child is able to take, whether they want to be a builder or carpentry, every child, so that they all will be able to get a job when they graduate.
Thank you.
I
Ms.
agree.
Was there a response? Go ahead, please.
And I have spoken to the CTE team, and we do want to do another survey with students, and correct, with middle school students, because we want to gather what their interests are and prepare them for the CTE programs when they get to high school. But correct, our other survey was just in the northern area to launch the CTE evening. And I just said this to the team a couple of weeks ago. I'm like, okay, we need to do another survey. But you are correct, Ms. Queen.
Ms. Queen, we actually did announce the end of last year an $800,000 grant from J.P. Morgan Chase to put in a wall-to-wall IT academy at Largo High School. I think that's in your district. Dr. Cadet could give more details as to it, but we are thinking about, middle of the county, north of the county, south of the county, kind of and that's for every single student at the school that enters the 9th grade.
And I don't want to give the impression that we're turning kids away from career and technical education programs, because we're not.
Thank you, Ms. Queen. Mr. Valentine.
Thank you. And I'm sort of piggybacking off some of the need for data. I'm curious, particularly as it relates to demographics who are in our teacher pipeline, percentage of Latino, percentage of men, target needs in our system. And if we don't have them, then what are we doing to really recruit and advertise to those target groups? As it relates to our Latino educators, where many of our educators are coming from, whether it be Puerto Rico or Spain, but most of our students are coming from Central America. The importance that we are, our teaching force reflects the diaspora within the Latino community. Also, I'm also curious about, again, just participation countywide and interest, Dr. Cadet and others. Are we seeing a high demand, or has it peaked? Or we sort of, this is a percentage of students who have already enrolled, and so they continue to enroll, and whether there's a strategy to really expand this to students who wouldn't traditionally be exposed to this, but would because of a campaign. And I brought this up at a previous meeting, and I've shared this with you, Dr. Cadet, that the idea of sort of framing these as a single career. Do you want to be a plumber? Do you want to be a carpenter? Do you want to be a barber? Versus the entrepreneurial, the business side of running a plumbing company, which includes inventory, hiring and firing, regulations, purchasing equipment, to the point where we're calling them business people, not necessarily and limiting to that. Because if you said, do you want to be a plumber, the first thing they see is somebody working on a toilet. Do you want to be a business person? Because I know plumbers who have 20, 30, 40 employees. Is that a strategy? How can we sort of reframe this to students who wouldn't traditionally enroll in this in a way that says, into their parents as well? Because I imagine that a lot of them are being stirred away from this by parents who are saying, no, I want you to go to a four-year institution. I want you to be a lawyer, doctor, and like. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Thank you for that. So yes, similar to the comments I made earlier, that we are building in the entrepreneurial track, the business owner track, and the executive leadership components to all of our pathways, because we also want our students to, when they graduate, not to just have certification, but also have, in some cases, a business plan to go out and be ready to serve at whatever level in whatever capacity fits their desire. In terms of the second part of your question, we are being very intentional around our messaging with all of our students and with all of our parents in our communities. We have the specialty showcase, which is coming up next week, where we will feature and we will highlight all of the things that are going on with CTE. We are going to PTSA meetings. We are going to community events. We are inundating every medium that we can find to let people know what CTE has to offer. We realize that the largest misconception about CTE is people really don't know what we do and what we offer in Prince George's County. And I think that once people have the clear idea and understanding of what Prince George's County Public Schools offers in regards to career and technical education, I think that that will also aid in the uptick of enrollment, in interest, and in completion of our CTE programs.
Can I ask you quickly, how young are you going? So when you're going to PTA meetings, are these middle and elementary schools, or?
Oh, in some cases, for some of our feeder schools, we're as early as, well, I can think of 2 elementary and several middle schools.
Okay. Dr. Libby, you were going to say something?
So the team actually looked at the data, and because of some of the efforts they did last school year, enrollment in CTE programs did increase for this school year.
Okay, thank you. I mean, I'll just reiterate. I mean, I'm an adjunct professor at the Community College of Prince George's. It is by far the best kept secret in this state. Community colleges nationally, I think there's been conversations around parent and college affordability in dual enrollment, and I don't think it's solely a working class conversation. I think there are affluent parents who are also looking at this that I know personally who are saying their children are going to go to a community college before going to a four-year institution. It just gives you time to think about what you want to major in and not really waste a lot of time and money on just kind of coming out of high school into a four-year institute, a two-year institution. So I'm just so happy to be a part of this and look forward to working with you all.
Thank you, colleague. Mr. Wallace and then Mr. Burrows, and we can proceed. Mr. Wallace.
I go twice?
No, sir.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Mr. Chair. And like my colleagues have said to the administration, thank you for the presentation tonight. My focus around CTE has been, I think Ms. Ammon was trying to get to this point, or did get to this point, around the equitable access of our programs. And Dr. Golson maybe are trying to clarify some things. The new CTE hubs, the one at Crossland and the one in the northern area, they will consolidate all of the programs that are kind of spread however around the county.
That is accurate.
So by school year 2022, the list that's on our website that has certain programs at certain schools, it'll just be at those 2 schools. You can choose all of these programs, these 10 tracks. If you're above Central Avenue, you go to one school. If you're below Central Avenue, you go to another school. Is that correct?
So our focus right now is on the southern area hub, which is Crossland, and as we share, Crossland High School, and as we shared before, we actually have designated funds from MGM that allow us to upgrade that facility. What we do find is the reason we have such low enrollment is because we do have duplicate programs in schools that are so very close to each other. An example of that would be Suitland High School, where we have an automotive program there, and then we can also have one at Crossland. So it is our goal to consolidate.
And with that in mind, there's also an automotive program. I hate to speak for other districts. Egwin Park, that's about 20 minutes away. Will that program exist even though there is a larger, more well-funded program at Crossland in a hub?
What we'll begin to do is to consolidate to one location.
Okay. Thank you.
So that affects all, not just Suitland.
And I appreciate that. That's why I'm asking, because it is an equitable access piece, because you have some programs that are bound by boundary. And if I'm interested in, I think it's criminal justice, I have to go to that high school. And I had yielded many constituent concerns, students directly even, that are very interested in these programs. They have been surveyed and they want to go into these programs, but they just don't live in that school's boundary, and they feel like their school system doesn't care about their pathway forward. So I thank you so much for pushing forward on the hubs.
Thank you, Mr. Wallace. Mr. Burrows.
Dr. Golson, it sounds like what you're describing is the same process that we use for our science and tech programs. Is that correct?
Exactly.
And our French immersion and Montessori programs.
Correct.
Okay. I do have some questions about the students who are in the CTE programs. When I was a student over at Crossland, the notion was that if you were going to college, you took AP. If you were not, you were going to go to CTE. If you were well behaved, you took honors courses, and if you were not, you would go down to CTE. And so I'm happy to see that paradigm is shifting in our school district. I recognize that there's a culture shift occurring, and I appreciate that. I do have some questions about how are we embedding math and reading into these, how are we concentrating that with this pathway as well? Because no matter what you do, you have to be proficient in both math and reading. So what are we doing in the CTE world to emphasize the basic skills?
Not only math and reading, but also science for some of these CTE pathways. So there's tutoring available, and also they've done an Explorers Summer Bridge program for the past 2 years to help students prepare and build up those skills that they need for those CTE pathways. Dr. Cadet, you want to add anything?
And I do want to add, well, even though you're in a career and technical education program, you still have to meet the graduation requirements. So you're not excluded from that. So students still have to take 4 years of mathematics, 4 years of reading English language arts, and their prescribed state requirement. What happens is very similar to a college track. What ends up happening is that your elective courses are centered around those areas that are in your area of concentration for your career and technical education field. Then in addition, those students, so for those students who are on the college track, we tend to tell them to take an advanced placement course or to take dual enrollment. For our CTE students, we're preparing them to take the technical skills assessment that goes along with their area of certification, and many of them still also have to take dual enrollment courses as well.
Okay. Now, I would like to see the breakdown, and it might be too much to do it this past year, but maybe next year, of how our CTE students are doing on those exams, the math and reading exams, to make sure that it's not so far apart.
We actually can disaggregate that because we have it by student, because we have a monitoring and accountability division. We can begin to disaggregate that data ourselves.
And something else we have noticed is that our students are performing higher, and just based on the nature of the subject matter that they're learning. So we find that they are testing higher than the non-CTE students in a variety of their core subject areas.
That's great. And then also, so in addition to the emphasis on reading and writing and English and math, is there any component of the CTE program that emphasizes financial literacy? I know that for so many of these fields, you need to be very financially literate, more so than other fields. And so how do we incorporate financial literacy in our CTE programs?
Dr. Cadet can respond, but the business finance program has that financial literacy embedded, and the new program that we're going to launch at Potomac High School, 3DE, will also have an emphasis on financial literacy.
It's also important to note in our cosmetology and barbering, there's also a filter of financial literacy as well, because as stated by one of our board members earlier, it's also important to know that we're trying to create entrepreneurs, right, not just participants who are going to work in a business, but to lead their own business.
Yeah, absolutely. Man, that's fantastic. Now, similar to what you just mentioned with the barbering and the cosmetology, I really do think that there has to be strong components of financial literacy in every CTE component, really in every program across the school district, especially the CTE components, since that's what we're talking about now.
Thank you, Mr. Burrows. Ms. Williams.
Thank you. So whenever we make a change to how we operate in the school system, we know that everything is interconnected. If we move one thing, it's going to affect the other departments. So I'd like to get to see how the scenario of making a hub for these CTE programs and combining them all into one school will affect not only the population of the schools that will lose their CTE program, but also the school-based budget that will affect that school, because in some districts, especially in District 9, where we have a school for every student's desire, to take away the CTE program from Gwynn Park, which is, you know, one of my high schools in population, that will affect their school-based budget, which then will affect the number of teachers that they could hire and everything that they could serve the students that are not in a CTE program. So I'd like to see how the effect will impact the schools in my district, really across the board. But one of our biggest challenges that we're having this year, well, for the last 5 years, has been transportation. And to consolidate students into a hub, that means we're transporting students probably further than the schools that they're in now. I'd like to see how that will be handled. So that's something that I'd like to see in a follow-up. My second question is, well, my second point, and it may be a follow-up, is when I look at the CTE programs, or programs in general, maybe I'm combining them, but I see two different tracks, one that will lead to a certification and one that leads to an associate's degree, meaning the P-TECH program. Are those considered, are you looking at those to put those in the CTE hubs, or will they be separate?
No, they will not be, and unfortunately, because the presentation you could not see, but if you go to slide 9, you'll see which programs have a certification or licensure program, and you'll see that the P-TECH is not listed there.
Okay, so the hub will be for programs that will lead to a certification. Okay. And so that's, now that I know there is a separation, then I'm okay with that. But I'd really like to see how this will affect those schools that have a high population that are in CTE programs, and when you remove them, what will the effect be on those schools' school-based budget and also the transportation matter? Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Omalala.
Dr. Golson, I had a question concerning financial literacy. So, as you know, financial literacy is a broad topic or curriculum. So I wanted to know if you could just be a little bit more specific in terms of what they're going to be learning in the classroom. Are they going to be learning to file taxes, or are they learning how to build balance a budget?
So it varies per pathway strand. So an example of that would be at one of our schools, we have a culinary arts program, and then we use the Business Management Academy program to help to look at the accounting of that culinary arts program. They actually help them to keep their books for that program so they can talk about the profits and the expenditures that take place. So it varies per specific strand or academy, not necessarily about doing taxes for their own personal benefit. We know that our students who are in 8th grade all experience Finance Park, where they have an opportunity to do the balancing of their own personal budget based on the career that they select, and then they do it over a month period, and then they have an opportunity where they have a simulated situation that arises and they have to calculate that. That's totally different. But what we do have is that we've provided, which we'll provide to you as well, is places where we have implemented financial literacy throughout our elementary, middle, and then high school curriculum. At the high school level, we offer an elective course that's solely on financial literacy, in addition to programs that specifically talk about financial literacy.
So that financial literacy as an option, is it offered at all high schools?
No, it's not offered at all high schools.
Okay. And then to follow up to that, In terms of the CTE program continuum, do alumni come back and work with the current students to build on that relationship so when they do graduate, there's an opportunity for them to have a job right after school?
So what we do have for all of our career technical education programs are called advisory groups, where we actually have business people in those areas served to talk about ways that we can recruit students to those fields and to make sure that we're utilizing best practices and preparing our students for the industry. So that sometimes does have on it alumni, but it also has just business community members who work in that area and field and who are able to provide internships and externships for our adults, internships for our students. It's our hope, though, that once our students get their certification, that they'll go to work somewhere locally out in Prince George's County and not go out the area.
Thank you, sir. And now Ms. Queen for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Dr. Thornton.
You're welcome.
So I have a couple of questions about the CTE. First, I want to agree with Mr. Barrows on the importance of financial literacy. I think accounting is needed in every course, not just CTE. We need to get back to giving all students accounting to graduate. But I also have a concern, as Ms. Williams does, with transportation. One of my last concerns is that what about us separating the students into, instead of blending them in when we talk about doing clusters, one north and one south? And I want a little clarification of the question that Mr. Wallace asked. He said, would only the CTE programs be in the north and the south? And that was not my understanding, because I heard you say something was going to be at Lago. But I think he was trying to ask a question that once you do that, will all the programs only be at the hub in the north and at the hub in the south? So I want clarification on that.
So let me first clarify, we offer Accounting 1 and Accounting 2 at the high school level at most of our high schools. I can tell you almost every high school offers those two basic business courses.
Okay, it's offered but not a mandatory class.
No, it is not mandatory.
That's
it is not required by Maryland State Department of Education. The second component is that there will be some exceptions to the rule. So an example would be 3DE or Career Academy, or for the Academy of Health Sciences, or the 3DE program that we just announced that will still be at Potomac High School. So there is a delineation, and I think what we have to do is make sure we provide you with a list of what are CTE and what are outside of the component of CTE. Because the program that we just announced that would be starting next school year, we're in the planning phase at Largo High School for the, I'm sorry, I drew a blank. No, not 3DE, at Largo.
I know what you're talking about.
Sorry. Talent Ready, thank you. We have every acronym. Talent Ready is not considered a 3D, it's not considered a career and technical education program. So what we will do is provide you a list of what is CTE and what is not.
Okay, so then another question that I have to ask is, because we're talking about doing it north and south, then I have a problem because I'm Central Prince George's County, and one of the things that we notice, Central Prince George's County, most of the students don't have the proper transportation, even their parents, if they get stuck after school for certain things. So I think as we talk about the Every Child Should Succeed Act and being fair across the county, when we talk about putting programs only in certain part of the counties, we're leaving out a certain part of the county, and what I see is that what we'll be doing is leaving out Central Prince George's County by doing that. And I want to say in my last 21 minutes, if you notice in my part of the county, especially in District 6, it is the lowest income making. I think that part of the county should be more important for you to be putting CTE programs in.
So let me just clarify, just so folks know, career and technical education is not for a certain class of students. It is for all students who are interested in going into that area or field. And we have to change the narrative around that, because I don't want our children to believe that they have to choose that as an option if they decide that they cannot get into college. It's a viable way to begin to support your family or to do what you're interested in. Not every kid wants to go to college, and we support that. The second piece of it is that once we share the data with you, you'll see that we have low enrollment in several programs because we have them in multiple locations. And so it's difficult to sustain quality programs when you have 4, 5, 6 students in one location dispersed throughout the county, that same number. When you're able to combine all those programs, have one quality teacher who has actually worked in that field, then we're better able to provide our students with a quality program. And that's ultimately what we're aiming to do. So when
Thank
you
you.
see the data, you'll see that.
Thank you, Dr. Golston. Mr. Valentine.
This gets back to my colleague, Mr. Burrows' point around this being equivalent to the French immersion and the science and tech program. Just to confirm, I may have missed this or stepped out of the room. These students will be provided transportation from wherever they live. So my question is, we offer a tremendous amount of choice in this school system, probably more than any other district in Maryland and in many cases around the country. When I go around and talk about what we offer that are in most traditional public and not charter is quite unusual. At the same time, this does put a lot of stress on our transportation. An example, I had a cousin who lived in Fort Washington but attended Largo for one of the programs and got a bus that took him from Fort Washington to Largo High School every day. And so my question is, what are the benefits of creating these hubs and sort of pulling the stress off of our bus drivers and the runs that have to be created because there's so much moving around in order to serve the amount of choice that we offer that's, again, highly unusual, particularly as it relates to even our dual enrollment. We're the only district in the state that actually has a middle college on the campus of our community college. The only district, I believe, that offers Montessori. I don't think any other district does. I know Montgomery County wanted to create a Montessori charter. They did, and they closed it down, and now it's a private school. And so there's a choice here at a level, but at the same time, we're a victim of our own success. People see it, they want it, you take it away, they come for your head. But let's talk about the benefit to our transportation by creating these hubs. I'm just, because I see my brother in the back row from our transportation office who I imagine would also be interested in this.
So it actually does, because right now, as you shared, what we're doing is transporting students across the county to the same program that's offered in different locations. So being able to consolidate in just fewer locations will help to eliminate the number of routes. As I've stated on several occasions, we have over 1,000 routes that we are trying to service. And part of that is compounded by our specialty programs and all the options that we provide. And there's not a single program that we offer where transportation is not provided. Now, how we look at that will have to change and differ. What we are now doing is creating a transportation task force to look at how other jurisdictions address this. And many of them have converted to a hub process where students go to a specific location, take a bus from there to their next location. We attempted to do that with the Academy of Health Sciences when we first started that program, and then have changed it this school year to reduce the number of routes. So this will help to eliminate some of the route issues that we currently have. Will it change it so that it's perfect? What would be perfect is for us to get more drivers. So if you're interested in signing up to be a bus driver, please check our website.
And my last question, I guess, is bus driving going to be a part of our curriculum moving forward? Can we grow our own bus drivers?
I'd love to, and actually we had not thought of that as an option since we are now growing our own teachers. So thank you for that recommendation.
Thank you, Mr. Valentine. Ms. Ahmed.
Yeah, I just want to echo the points of some of my colleagues have made, Ms. Queen, Ms. Williams, Mr. Valentine. Essentially, y'all are going to have to convince me on consolidation, and you're going to have to convince me and the members of our community on it. I just don't know that I'm sold. I love the idea of being able to provide opportunities for all of our students. That's a positive. But with consolidation, it's seen as taking away something from a community. And y'all just are going to have to convince me over the next couple of weeks and months. That's all.
Thank you, Ms. Ahmed. And Mr. Burrows.
I'd appreciate if you could provide the board members the data of the small dwindling programs in their areas and the amount of sense that it makes to bring everyone together. I think the quality of the programs will dramatically increase. I think the investment will dramatically increase, and so it makes sense to me, and I look forward to supporting it. I buzzed in because I neglected to thank the board chair for taking over this task force. I've noticed a very big difference since you've assumed the leadership role on this task force. So thank you for adding this additional item on your to-do list.
Thank you, sir.
I believe the recommendations are more equitable now and student-centered. So thank you.
Thank you. Ms. Williams. Ms. Williams,
Thank
is
you.
that your light?
Thank you. So, just thinking about this, consolidation, being an alumni from Crossland High School, knowing how big the population is and what it can be, what is the consideration for removing some of the programs that they have now? Currently, they have an IB program. What is the thought about moving so many kids into the school? What will you be taking out of the school to accommodate those students? I'd like to see that in as we think through this program.
So actually, the school is already under-enrolled, so we do have a large number of vacant seats. But we also have begun the process of beginning to phase out IB. We only currently have 4 students in the program. We will complete it for those 4 students, but are not taking in any new students.
I would love to have those seats come to Frederick Douglass, just putting a plug in there. Also, is there a reason for not considering a 3-hub zone, a central, south, and north hub zone?
First, cost was the number one factor. And in looking at our existing infrastructure, we don't currently have a location that's centrally located that has a large number of CTE programs already in existence where we didn't have to do a major facility renovation.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. And Mr. Omalola.
Dr. Golson, I had one question and I guess a request or a comment. I wanted to know when we start the CTE program push, how will this affect our push for community schools? Because I know we'll be moving students all over the county. So how will this affect our community school push? In addition, at our last SMOB Advisory Council meeting, somebody actually brought up the idea of having a CTE program around receiving your CDL license. I wanted to know if we could look into that, because if we're able to invest back into our school system right after a senior year with your CDL license, I think would be a great help.
We've duly noted for the CDL, but just know that you do have to be 21 in order to receive your CDL license. So if you could please let them know in that next meeting that you attend. Secondly, having additional options is no different. We'll have the opportunity to offer community schools. What's unique about community schools is that you have an opportunity for your community investment businesses around that school to provide supports. That won't change by having a hub. Actually, you'll find that you'll probably have a whole lot more support that are coming because you have businesses who want to make sure that they hire those students immediately upon getting their certification.
Thank you. And our final speaker is Mr. Wallace.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I know many of my colleagues are wrestling with this conversation around CTE hubs. I too wrestle with it, and I still am, with representing a community that is slated to lose a very generationally significant program. Many in the Suitland community have concerns about the removal of the CTE program at Suitland High School. What I have tried to convey to the community is that while there is a removal and a relocation 2.3 miles west, it's a beauty and a curse. Crossland High School is within the county impact zone for MGM funding. And I think it is a disservice to the Suitland High School students that they are in courses that are half enrolled and don't have the same amount of resources or the accessibility to resources that their peers 2.3 miles away can get. Given that, I understand that colleagues that are not 2.3 miles away from a hub have concerns as well. But I would stress this board's commitment to equity and board policy 0101, where all students, regardless of their socioeconomic status, have accessibility to all of our programs. As it currently sits, that does not happen. I have a student right now in District Heights that would love to, graduated, would have loved to been in the criminal justice program, but was not boundaried for that school. That was a disservice to him. And that email still resonates with me to this day. So when we talk about being convinced or having to convey this action of the administration, this progressive action that many other counties have done in the state, Let's keep in mind students like that who wanted an opportunity, but because their parents lived in a zip code that didn't have that program, their pathway to success suffered. Thank you.
Thank you, and that concludes our discussion of this, and thank you again, Dr. Golson, and to our staff colleagues. We'll now move to consideration of item 6.1, and Dr. Golson, please present it to us.
Item 6.1 requires board approval of a contract for the development of internal controls and redesign of business processes for Prince George's County Public Schools.
Colleagues, may I have a motion regarding 6.1? Is there a second? It's been properly moved and seconded that the board approve item 6.1. Discussion, I see Ms. Ahmed.
Yeah, so Dr. Goldson, I was really confused by this contract. You all issued a notice to proceed before getting it formally approved by the board. Why?
So this is the RFP. This was a response to the RFP that we put out for a procurement contract to help with our response to the Office of Legislative Audit. When we began the process of selecting a company, we asked the county government to assist in the selection process because we didn't think it would be fair for our own procurement department to execute that process. When we did, the county government agreed to provide us a sum of money to help towards the acquiring of that company. They committed to an amount of $250,000, which actually we're kind of in debate because I think they might have committed to a little bit more, but neither here nor there. They issued their notice to proceed for the amount that they agreed to pay us, that they would do for our contribution. So what you now see for the board action summary is the remaining amount of that contract minus theirs backed out.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate that clarification. So they've started work. Where are they in the process now? Are they?
They actually have not entered our school system yet. We just started the process of they've only had one meeting to talk about what that transition would look like. If board approved tonight, what would happen is that they then would go back to meet with Mr. Stanton again, and the very first thing they would focus on are the sole source contracts, which we believe would take about a month. After they began looking at those, the ones that were identified in the Office of Legislative Audit, we then will go to the second phase of the work, which then looks at how we begin to transition to bring them in, look at our existing program for procurement, working with our existing staff to begin to create best practices from henceforth.
Okay, what I would really appreciate, I think, is if possible, these folks to get our internal audit reports. They'll probably get the MSD audit report, hotline complaints as it relates to these issues, because I'm sure they're going to interview people from the system, but these are folks coming in from either within the system as whistleblowers or from outside the system that are seeing this, and they need to know, the folks that are doing this work need to know about all of those things as well.
So the Office of Legislative Audit, they do have, and they have our responses to it, and just once again, please note that that information is publicly placed on our website. If you do a search for Office of Legislative Audit, you will see that.
Okay.
The report and our responses for both quarters.
All right, I do have a couple more questions. When I saw the costing, Basilio Cobb costed more than EY, so why did we go with BC?
So we actually had a committee of our staff, county government staff, and internal audit, and we actually went with the organization who could provide all phases and components of what we requested in the RFP. That was to go back and review all the sole source contracts, to then come in and do an analysis of our existing procurement department and find ways to help us to transition and use the existing employees, but then also to create a plan of what positions we needed to make sure that we were providing best practices. In this case, they were the one that could give us all three components.
Okay, and so they put this cost estimate at 1.3 million, but the amount on our board action summary says 1 million. Is that because 250 is coming from the county?
Correct, we had to back that amount out.
Okay, and then I see the RFP is here, but the contract isn't. Is there a way, maybe I can make a friendly amendment to the motion that just says that we approve this with the understanding that the contract will not exceed 1 million? Because I just don't know. If they've cited it for that much and the county, you're having a debate about how much the county's putting in, I don't want us to be in a situation where we're unsure about how much we're actually entering this contract into giving.
Actually, we would not be giving more, we would be getting less.
Okay.
So you can put the maximum amount, but the amount that you're approving now is the maximum amount we will pay.
Okay.
And it currently states in the board action summary will not exceed $1 million.
Correct.
So
It would be less than that
It'd
if
be
we were
less than
able to agree to the county government paying a little more.
So I would ask the motion makers, could that be considered a friendly amendment to add,
What we're saying is you don't need to do it because there's language already written in there saying it will not exceed this amount.
all right. And then one last thing, I know that they're gonna provide monthly updates, progress reports. Could those progress reports also be, presented or shown to us, updated to us?
and
Definitely.
Ms. Winston will be
Okay.
engaged through the process, and we can ensure it's part of her report.
Okay, thank you.
And colleagues, Dr. Golson, I would anticipate that Mr. Wallace's committee would be the chief reviewer of this on behalf of the board. So, Mr. Wallace, please. Ms. Williams.
Thank you. I just want to say that I'm excited about this, this process that we're undertaking, because for years we've had challenges with our procurement department. And from my experience from being the assistant chief of purchasing for Charles County, there are a lot of rules and regulations and timing that we have to stay within. So I'm excited about that. And I'm glad that Ms. Hamid asked about the updates on the process. I would like to put in a request that once this is done, that when we come up with our best practices, that it includes a regular presentation of the procurement activities that are occurring in our school system. I know we spend millions of dollars, you know, probably daily because of the size that we are. And I've followed the website, our purchasing office. I go there and check it on a regular basis just to see what's happening. But I think that it would benefit all of my colleagues to see the traffic and the work that goes into purchasing from the time that we decide that we want to take on a contract to the point where we award the contract and when we close out the contract. It's different from a contract for construction versus a consultant versus buying a product. We as a board have to understand the differences and the impact, and we can see what I would always say is procurement is the rubber to the road of our budget work. So we have to understand how that connects, how we're spending this $2 billion budget beyond just the staff that we're paying. What are we buying? What consultants are we hiring? And to understand that process, I think that'll alleviate some of our questions when we get a contract award put in front of us. So I would like to have put in our best practices, a presentation to the board. Maybe it's in your weekly updates, maybe once a month or something like that, so that we can see and understand the magnitude of the traffic and the work that procurement is doing. So thank you. And I will be recusing myself from this vote.
Thank you, Ms. Williams. Mr. Burrows. Mr. Burrows, yeah.
You mentioned county government a lot. What role will county government have related to this moving forward?
Moving forward, none.
Okay. And what role do they have with its selection?
Well, let me take that back when I say none. They won't, I mean, this honestly is our contract, but when I say none, honestly, best practices really are done when we're collaborating with our county government entity. And so there might be, in the best practices that this organization will come back and give, it might be that we might have to use some of the same practices that our county government partner uses. So I don't want to give the impression that we won't use some of those same strategies. But ultimately, this is our own procurement department. It's our own products that we purchase, contracts, et cetera, and we're the ones who are asking that our department be remodeled or reframed around those best practices.
Yeah, I'm just not convinced that county government isn't doing what our procurement department was doing that got us into this situation.
And once again, I'm an expert on Prince George's County Public Schools and not necessarily the county government. But I will tell you that they do have a new leader in their purchasing department. Okay. And I do know that he was helpful in helping us to at least do our procurement process so that it would be done with validity and making sure that we also did not ask our own procurement staff to do that. But in terms of the number of people who served on that panel, On our side, we had 2 or 3 folks who sat on our side and just 2 from the county government side. It was mainly driven by us, though.
Yeah, and I just want to say, Mr. Burrows, I think Mr. Sant will say this, in digging deeper into what our staff is doing, it should be noted that we actually have really, really good, dedicated people that work in purchasing. It is not always to be believed that everybody in there was a challenge or a problem. Often what we found was that lack of, follow-up, follow-through, adherence to guidelines, even proper professional development of the staff in that office. Ms. Jonna Smar, I think, is here, and we would do a disservice if we didn't at least acknowledge her hard work, because sometimes when a big, cloud is cast over people, sometimes some of the hardest working people are not the ones who should be in the line of fire. So every single contract the last year has been reviewed and thoroughly reviewed by her, Diana Wiles, Mark Fawcett, and Barry Stanton. And there's been a measurable increase in ensuring that we're not following the same practices. Basilio will do an additional job of making sure that the process that we have in place isn't just made up in Prince George's County Public Schools, but is what the best interests of, across the country are doing as well.
And how does this impact the CIP department? Because I have grave concerns about the procurement in CIP.
It'll be part of the review. I mean, CIP's fall on procurement, so it'll be part of the review that Basilio does, and I think it's important for us to know, I think Mr. Basilio is here, to ensure that we put an additional note next to that, so when we bring it back, you at least can identify what they found in that review.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. And Ms. Queen, I'm sorry.
Thank you, sir. One of my biggest favorite questions I like to ask as a daughter of a minority-owned business and a sister of a chief financial office, is this company a MBE? Thank you so very much.
Thank you, Ms. Queen. And our final speaker is Mr. Valentine.
My question was it an LBE? And it is. So I'm looking at it's based here in Lanham. So my question was to make sure it was MBE, LBE. Sound good to me.
Thank you. Colleagues, the vote is on the motion, and I'll ask Ms. Berkeley to please call the roll.
Ms. Ahmed?
Aye.
Ms. Boozer-Strother?
Yes.
Mr. Burrows?
Aye.
Ms. Queen?
Aye.
Mrs. Shepherd, excuse me.
Yes.
Mr. Valentine?
Aye.
Mr. Wallace?
Aye.
Mrs. Williams?
I recuse myself.
Abstain.
Dr. Thornton?
Aye. Thank you, colleagues, and thank you, Dr. Golston, for getting us to this point. Before I close out the meeting, I want to recognize, I should do this more often. She sits here, and she's such an impressive student from High Point, who is our PGRAS representative. Stand and take some applause from us. Ms. Vanessa Vilas, a student from High Point. And thank you for the service that you provide. I know you're a student, you have many things to do, but hopefully you're learning some things from sitting here observing us. And also want to thank, she was not able to get here for her public comments, the president of our Prince George's County Education Association, Ms. Dudley, and I assume that you'll be distributing the Nationals tickets shortly. Okay. Okay, you'll talk to me. Yeah. Thank you. Colleagues, we'll have a motion to approve actions taken in executive session. Those
So moved.
Second.
It's properly moved and seconded that items related to legal matters and advice, personnel matters, internal audit, chief executive officer report, administrative matters be approved. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Those opposing, no. The ayes have it, and the meeting is adjourned.
All right.